What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV. From inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan, visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to the show, of course, at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined, as always, by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. Little bit of a different setting for us. Not so bad, right?
A lot better than my bedroom with the couple little pictures behind me. Definitely a lot better to be here in the Cadillac Club.
It's great to be here in the Cadillac Club. Obviously, very lively situation here at Citi Field. We're kind of regulars now.
Yeah.
This is our second time. Yeah. First show we're doing at the Cadillac Club.
We're veterans. We know our way to the bathroom.
We know our way to the bathroom, know our way to the bar, the seats,
Yeah.
whatever you need here. It's a phenomenal space. Listen, there's no time to waste. Let's get right into it with this Mets team. There's no denying it right now what they are. They're struggling. They have lost 6 in a 3-game series in a row, Joe. You can't live like that, dropping 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 in all these series. The blame game is going around. We're going to do a little blame game, of course, later as well. Everybody's looking at what's the problem here, and I think, Joe, it's safe to say that it's a little bit of everything right now that's the problem.
It is, and they're 6-16 as of this recording in the month of June, and, I mean, Mets fans are used to the old June swoon. That's something that's kind of always been like a bugaboo. And
this feels extra problematic, though.
It does. It's at all levels. I mean, we could preface this with it all starts with the players. We all know that. The players on the field are ultimately what warrants the results. But you have questionable bullpen decisions. You have questionable just overall management decisions. And then you also look above the manager and the roster. Was it properly set up for success? Like, we're looking at some of these relievers, and you'll always have some of those quad A relievers that cycle in and cycle out, but it feels like the Mets really only have 2 reliable relievers in David Robertson and Brooks Raley. So, like you said, Connor, the blame really goes across the board. It starts with the players, it goes to the manager, it goes to the GM. When things are going poorly, it's wrong to just kind of point out one and say it's that one party's fault. It's a cumulative effort from the organization.
That's exactly right. The bullpen problems, of course, you could look at the Edwin Diaz injury, and I think when it happened, our initial conversation on this show was, well, who's going to step up? And to be fair, you couldn't ask for more from David Robertson. I mean, he's exceeded expectations stepping into a role for who was the best closer in baseball last year. The problem is, Joe, we knew the trickle effect. Who's going to step in for David Robertson? Well, you said Brooks Raley, he's been good, but Adam Ottavino has not been the player that we saw last year. Drew Smith has taken a step back, and then it's a lot of different names. They're searching for answers, whether it's Dominic Leone. Obviously, you have a younger player in Josh Walker who has had his ups and downs here. There's a ton of different players. Nagosic was pitching a lot of innings a couple weeks ago, and nobody's really been able to fill that void of the 6th, 7th, and 8th inning. And then it's even more problematic when your starters aren't working deep into games. So obviously we're starting this conversation of what's wrong with the team before we get into Buck Showalter, maybe the roster construction as a whole. But the trickle effect that injury has had on this entire team, combined with something you can't really see. We didn't think the starting pitching would struggle to work deep into games like this. This is how you find yourself into a 6-16 June and a team that has a gigantic hole to get back into the wild card. We're not talking division anymore, but wild card right now.
We knew that Edwin Diaz loss was a big loss. Like, that obviously
you can't replace him.
Yeah, it went without saying. But at the same time, when you think back to last year when the Mets won 101 games, there were stretches where they had kind of those, want to call them the Dominic Leone type, like almost random relievers, for lack of a better term, come through and give them a couple good weeks at a time before, being shifted out. Like guys like Adonis Medina, guys like Yohan Lopez. Those kind of guys kind of came in, gave you a little bit, and then you filter guys in and out. That's kind of normal of what happens with a good team. The Mets right now aren't being able to filter guys out because there's not much hanging out in AAA waiting to come up. And, the trickle effect had a much bigger impact, I think, than even you or I may have thought at the time.
Right, you look at the loss of Trevor Williams and how many holes he got them out of last year, whether it was needing to be a spot starter or whether it was needing to, I need to pitch the 6th and 7th inning. He filled so many voids for them. They haven't had that kind of guy, it feels like, either. And this is our first announcement, too. If you were in the Cadillac Club, you want to come up and give your thoughts on the bullpen, you want to ask a question, we are doing a lot of mailbag today, so come on up and talk to Joe and I. Let's get, of course, into Buck Showalter, right? Because Joe, my takeaway with Buck, and I understand the frustrations, but when you look at it, when the team is struggling this bad, just from an actual players not playing to the back of their baseball card perspective, it feels like every game that Buck can have some kind of effect in a negative way, it's so amplified and magnified because it's easier to talk about replacing the manager.
Right.
You can't replace guys that are on long-term $20+ million contracts. And I'm not defending Buck Showalter. He's had his problems. This has not been last year. It feels like everything's gone the opposite way. But I think that's how we've kind of walked into this conversation where it feels like he's the target for a lot of Mets fans right now.
It's the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to go after the manager. And, when the Mets hired Buck, I don't think it was unanimous across the fan base that everyone wanted Buck. Like, everyone was willing to give him a shot, obviously. And then last year worked out. And it was just like, all right, whoever was a pundit of Buck kind of like threw their hands up and said, I was wrong. It is what it is.
I was one of them.
And now a lot of the things that people had questions about, he has previously had a lot of bullpen management issues throughout his career, and that's coming forward now again this year. So to me, it's just when you look at the way this team was constructed, favors were not done for Buck.
Right.
There's no way around that. So like you said, we're not making excuses for him, but a good manager is supposed to add value in situations where maybe it shouldn't be working. Last year was a prime example, like you said, like making things work that normally wouldn't, and knowing the rules inside and out. It feels like this team has been so ill prepared for these new rules. They've been caught in so many pitch clock violations, and Jeff McNeil at second base, and you have mental mistakes.
Dropping pop-ups.
Dropping basic pop-ups. Like, when you think about that, to me, that falls on the manager and the coaching staff to a degree of you have to be preparing these guys to not make these mental mistakes, because errors are going to happen. Like Brett Beatty threw a ball that Pete didn't pick yesterday, got an error. Like, you're going to make physical errors. Mental errors, I think, fall a little on the coaching staff as well.
I think absolutely. When you look at baseball, your job as a manager, one of the higher priority things are keeping the team locked in and ready to go. And for as locked in as the Mets were last year, whether it was never being out of a game, remember how many late inning situations they fought back, not making costly mistakes in the field, just constantly being positioned the right way. Everything has gone the reverse this year, and it's really hard to cover that ground. I think this is an easy transition to the rotation, because that's kind of the opposite of, we talk about the things that are maybe Buck's responsible for or in his hands, and they're justifiable criticism in my eyes. What Buck can't control is Justin Verlander sweating through 5 innings, right?
Yep.
Max Scherzer having 2 good starts, 2 awful starts, 2 good starts again. Kodai Senga, as we talk about all the time, he's been the least of their worries.
He's been everything that the Mets could have asked for when they signed him.
Carrasco either having a tough first inning or not being able to work through the lineup 3 times. Those are things that are 2 things, right? Players not performing up to expectations. Justin Verlander was paid a lot of money to come here and be an ace, and hasn't been near that. Same could be said for Max, who's been more of a roller coaster this year.
Right.
And hopefully this is him really turning the corner of being who Max Scherzer has been. But when you look at this, that's more roster construction as well, Joe, especially when you talk about the decision to pick up Carrasco's option and keep him here for about $14 million.
And I'll tell you, at the time, I was very much in favor. I was like, to find a starter like Carrasco, who at the time I was like, he's a 5th starter. But, look at what the back-end starters on the free agent market are getting. $18 million a year, $19 million a year. That's what back-end guys are getting paid nowadays. So I thought it was a no-brainer, and Carrasco is obviously missed time with the elbow problem, and like you said, Connor, it's either he can't get out of the first or he can't work deep in the games like everybody else in the rotation. Frankly, Tyler McGill spent so much time as the 5th starter, and he's basically struggled all year. David Peterson, a guy that you and I have been high on for at least a couple years now, he has not worked out this year, and he even went back to AAA Syracuse, and he wasn't performing there either. The loss of Jose Quintana is something that we just have not talked about at all, because he's been gone since spring training. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, you almost forget. It's like Jed Lowry. Yeah. I mean, he's going to be back, unlike Jed Lowry, but you forgot he was actually signed.
He's working his way back, and it seems like he may be one rehab start away from returning. Jose Quintana posted an ERA under 3 last year, and I'm not saying that he would have replicated that this year, but even if he was a mid-3s, an upper 3s, that, frankly, would be the number 2 ERA on the Mets right now. So the roster construction, I don't know what I would have done different. We were talking to our producer, Jeff, about this when we arrived. I don't know what I would have done different with the rotation, but it's evident that it's just not working.
Right. They did try. This team spent a lot of money. This is an expensive team. And that's a good transition to a quick mailbag question while we're talking about the rotation, because it was good to see Quintana brought up on this show. Of course, you beat this person to the punch here, Joe. But LTC Lindor asked, do either of you really think Jose Quintana can actually help this team? Just like every other Mets pitcher, he was getting shelled during spring training. And obviously, this person was not very happy about Epler's signings, but they do love the show. So thank you, LTC Lindor. That's what we do care about. In all seriousness, Joe, with Quintana set to come back, the number 5 spot for this rotation, my God. I mean, it's a mix of things. It's non-competitive starts, not giving innings, and Quintana was great in both those areas last year. He made all of his starts, had a great season. He pitches deep into games when you need him to. I don't think we should expect Quintana to be what we saw last year, but to your point, can he be a guy with a sub-4 ERA that can give you a quality start once in a while? And this is an upgrade over McGill, Peterson, that kind of section of the world of the pitchers that the Mets are living in right now.
Yeah, so can he help? Yeah, of course, because
he should.
The bar is down here.
Wildly low.
Yeah, the bar is low for him to actually help out the Mets. So I do think he can. The question is, as we head into the All-Star break, we're getting dangerously close, if not already there, we're getting dangerously close to it being too late for any kind of help. Like, if they don't go on a run here in these last 12 games or so before the All-Star break, during the break, Billy Epler needs to be talking to teams about what could potentially be available to sell, which is crazy to think that we're talking about this. But certainly, Jose Quintana could and should be an upgrade over what they're using at the back end of the rotation.
I mean, when you just lay out the rotation, Verlander obviously working through things, and we don't know if there's a light at the end of the tunnel, if he's going to be the Justin Verlander we know.
He's a confusing one to me because it all looks there. The stuff is there. His breaking ball's crisp. The velocity's there. Like,
what about the pitch clock?
That's the only thing.
The body language to me is a little hot and cold with him.
We know that him with the umpire in his start, he had a problem with the pitch
warm-up
clock
pitches.
There. With the warm-up pitches.
How does this keep happening?
I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, we're learning more as we go. Like, I didn't even know there was a warm-up pitch clock. I thought, like, you just warmed up, you got whatever pitches, and then you had a regular pitch clock. But you wonder if the pitch clock is having an adverse effect on the older pitchers like Max and Verlander, because from a stuff perspective, there's no reason why, in my opinion, that Justin Verlander shouldn't be pitching like a frontline starter.
All right, we got another question here. This is from Chris. How does the future of the rotation look right now? Where in the rotation does Tidwell project? Is there any hope for Matt Allen at this point? Do the Mets think they have a future full rotation in the minors, or expect to need to sign free agents for the foreseeable future? I think, Joe, it's a balance now. We're past the point of, hey, you got to buy a rotation every single year. Eventually, some of these guys are going to have a shot.
And they have to. And that was a lot of questions in one, so I'm going to try to hit them one at a time.
Tidwell, right?
Tidwell.
Yeah.
Tidwell.
Matt Allen.
Yep.
And then free agency.
Perfect. Okay, so Tidwell, he's actually been great of late. He's starting to trim down the walks a bit, because that was his biggest problem. He doesn't give up hits. He strikes out a lot of batters. He's up to 98, 99 on the gun, wipeout slider. But he was walking 7 guys per 9. And over his last 3 starts, he only has 4 walks. So Tidwell is trending in the right direction as he adjusts the pro ball. We don't account for a lot of these players. Like, Tidwell went to Tennessee. He's from more the South. Adjusting to the Brooklyn weather, as Kevin Parada told us
brought that up
on the show last week. Like, that's an adjustment that we can't account for as people that just cover the team. So Tidwell's trending in the right direction. He's the top pitcher in the system for me. I think he translates as a potential mid-rotation starter as long as his command continues to stay on the trajectory and not move backwards in the other direction. You look at a guy like Mike Vasil, who got selected to the Futures game, which is really exciting for him, and he's up at AAA. He's had a couple so-so starts in his first couple AAA outings, but he looks like a number 4, number 5 starter, which, again, like we mentioned before,
it's a need.
It's not only is it a need, but those guys get money on the market. Because very often when I do my prospect list and I write articles that you can read at SNY.TV and I cite someone being a back-end type of starter, I get a bunch of comments like, oh, the number 11 prospect is a back-end starter. That's worth a lot of money. So high on Vasil as well, and he's probably a little closer to big league ready than Tidwell is. Matt Allen is an out of sight, out of mind, unfortunate situation. As talented arm as the Mets have drafted probably in some time, he's just had 2 Tommy John surgeries and nerve transposition surgery, and he's going to go over 4 years between throwing professional pitches when he returns sometime in 2024. So he's we'll see. And free agency, Connor, like you said, it's a balance. You're always going to be signing free agents, especially when you're a team that's looking to win. I don't think it's realistic to expect there's ever going to be a point where you just have 5 homegrown guys in rotation and that's it.
And as it stands right now, I mean, you just look at the payroll situation, there's a very good chance that Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander for sure, and Quintana, they're part of this rotation next year. Yeah. Whether they stay very hot and cold, as we've seen. Quintana we haven't seen, so he's somebody that if he comes back and looks good, that's a big plus for next year. So him coming back matters a lot, not just for this second half if they could do anything, but really for the outlook of next year. But Scherzer and Verlander are here. Senga is here, of course, for a long time. Yeah. You're not looking at going out and signing 3 starters, but you are hoping some of the guys you mentioned, they don't have to start the year in the rotation next year, but can they give you something within the next 2 years?
Ideally, you're signing someone for that last spot because, I mean, if you want, you can't go into next year saying David Peterson or Tyler McGill are a part of this rotation. You just simply can't based on how they've pitched this year. So you're going to have to sign somebody, find this year's Jose Quintana, right? And hopefully just have him not get hurt in spring training.
Right.
Like if you can do that, I think the rotation has a chance to be fine. And I'm interested on the Verlander and Scherzer stuff. I have high doubts, but let's just talk like extreme situations. If they're sellers at the deadline, is there a team that might be willing to trade for one of those guys? I certainly wouldn't trade both, and right. you may not get a bite on either of them. But I think it's something to at least keep in the back of our mind, like, you know, if I were the Cincinnati Reds, and let's just say for the purpose of this discussion, the Mets fell out of it and they were going to become sellers, I'd call the Mets and say, how much of Scherzer's money will you pay this year?
And probably all of it if it netted a big prospect return. Joe, we just got to see this with Eduardo Escobar. Difference is Scherzer will be due to get paid next year. Escobar just walks after this season. So
it's an option, but he's
probably going to take it because it's a lot of money.
Right.
But you're right. You do. I think the conversation also would be around Scherzer. I think Verlander is here next year. There's the vesting option in year 3, of course. Scherzer's a guy that, yes, he has the no trade, but you think he'd waive it to go to a contender.
Yeah.
But you're right, Joe. And I think that's something that it's hard to do the glass half full thing here for the Mets right now. I get it. But one glass half full thing that we just got to see with the Escobar trade is this ownership is willing to pay off contracts to make the system better. It's not just dump this guy, get rid of the salary, we're done. It's we'll pay all of that money, you get the player, but that means instead of a C-list prospect, maybe we get a B-list prospect. Right. For something like Scherzer where you're paying off that level of money,
you might get an
A-list prospect.
Yeah, you might get a quality piece, but the Escobar trade, like, to me, that's excellent work. And
that's the model, right?
That's the model. Like, if Steve Cohen and ownership, they're willing to pay down these contracts, I mean, he has the money, right? And it's one of those things that if you're willing to do that, teams are going to be more amenable to part with some things. It's, all right, well, we'll take Eduardo Escobar at the minimum. Maybe that's a Mark Canha conversation where he's owed a decent amount of money that no one wants him at that value, but for the minimum, maybe they'll give something. So it's something that I think in a couple weeks we're going to revisit this conversation because, look, maybe the Mets go on a run here before the All-Star break. I know everyone listening, watching, you're rolling your eyes at me right now. I totally get it. I'm not going to say I feel the utmost confidence that it's going to occur, but the time is right now. So if they're going to turn it around, it's right now. They have 12 games as of this recording, 11 if you're listening on Wednesday, 11 games until the All-Star break. They need to win 8 of them, 9 of them. They can't go 500 and say, oh, well, we're still kind of hanging on, because you're not hanging on at that point. If you get to the point where post-All-Star break you need to have a winning percentage above 700 to reasonably make the playoffs, you just don't have a real shot.
And as we said, I mean, it's getting late early right now for the Mets. And the Mets know that internally, and I think the players are probably feeling that. Escobar walking out the door it's your first little warning sign of and Escobar wasn't playing a lot, so maybe a little bit of a unique situation, but definitely the first sign of He's the first one, but Tommy Pham on a one-year deal. Like you said, Canna if you pay off that money. All right, we're going to get into more with the future of the Mets. A reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. All right, time to go back down on the farm. We kind of talked earlier about some players in Brooklyn, but let's get back to Mike Vasil here, Joe.
Yeah.
Futures game was not a surprise, but a nice update that Vasil will represent the organization in that. And I think everybody wants to know, and you touched on this lightly, but will we see him this year? Is there a need to see him this year? And what would that role even look like?
I don't see much of a reason to see him this year. Like, I did talk to scouts, so I wrote up Mike Vasil maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago or so on SNY.TV. You could find it. It's on my Twitter or somewhere on SNY. And I talked to a couple scouts that had seen him throw in AA, and they said it wouldn't shock me if he was big league ready by the end of the year. But it really depends where the Mets are at and what their plan is next year. Because if you are going to add Vasil to the 40-man roster way before you need to for Rule 5 draft purposes, you better be doing it with the idea of he's going to be my fifth starter on opening day. So if that's the case, I think it'd be best for him to spend the year in AAA, adjust there because he's had couple rocky starts to start off there. And sometime next year, I think he's absolutely an option because if anything has been shown this year, we thought you needed 8, 9, 10 starters. You need 11, 12, 13 starters. So you need a lot of starting pitching depth, and Mike Vasil is certainly a guy that's looking like he's going to be a valuable part of that in 2024.
And I think what you said about the volume of starters, a lot of Mets fans, I get it. They're like, this always happens to us. This is happening to everyone. The Brewers are in town right now. Yeah. They're without their aces. The Dodgers are on, I feel like, pitcher 9, 10, and 11 right now. And they have the prospect farm to not thrive, but tread water with that. And that's something that Steve Cohen, since he got here, has said, we need a system to be able to do that. And the Mets don't have that kind of farm system yet. So I'm with you that I think for Vasil, the plan would be you go into next year with your 5 starters outlined, and then he's maybe one of those guys that's on reserve.
Yep.
Hey, if we need a number 5, he might be 6. He might not be 6. He might be 7 or 8. But realistically, you have him primed and ready for that kind of step-in role.
And that's part of the objective of hiring Eric Yeagers last offseason was to revamp the pitching player development side of this system. And so far, I mean, we're only a few months in, so people are looking for like immediate results at the major league level, but the Mets didn't have major league ready pitching prospects, so it's not like that was going to change. But we've seen growth from Vasil in a big way. We've seen growth from Blade Tidwell throughout the year. We've seen Christian Scott emerge as a legitimate pitching prospect for this team. We've seen Tyler Stewart, who was a 6th-round pick out of Southern Miss last year that, like, when I talk to scouts at draft time, they're like, yeah, he could be, like, you know, a big reliever, and he'll throw his sinker slider, and his stuff is ticked up as a pro, and he leads all of minor league baseball in ERA right now. So I think the pitching development system is working the way they want it to. We're just a few months into it, and we have a big MLB draft coming up, which we're going to preview on next week's show and recap on the show after, and maybe even the show after that too, because I could talk MLB draft for days. And the Mets have a lot of picks. They have a couple extra comp picks, and I have the expectation that you're going to see a lot of pitchers selected in that 20-round draft.
Stockpile the farm system with arms. On a different note, Joe, I know you want to take credit for this next one. Kevin Parada. We had him on the show last week, of course, and now it feels like he's on a little bit of a tear. He was heating up. We said to him, you look a lot better in June. After the show, he's just been on a scorcher right now. He had his first career multi-home run game. One of them was a 2-run inside the park home run in Brooklyn. I know you're smiling at that. What? Give it to me here. What do you got?
How often do you have a over-the-fence home run and inside the park home run in the same game, and he hit it off the wall and outfielder misplayed it, and not only was it inside the park home run, he got home standing up. He didn't have to slide head first. Like, he just ran home. So, no, Kevin Parada's been fantastic, and he was a great guest on the show last week.
It was the first inside the park home run by a Cyclones player since Major League Baseball stat portal began in the 2005 season.
Oh, okay.
So a big moment for Parada. Parada's picked up the pace offensively, like we said, over the last few weeks, dating back all the way to June 6th versus Greenville. 21-year-old is slashing .339. .391 on base percentage, .610 slugging, OPS over 1,000 in those 15 games. He's on a 7-game hitting streak. He's 12 for 28. And 12-game on base streak, of course, comes with that. So Parada, Joe, a little bit of a slow start in Brooklyn, but he's really finding it. And he's another guy, like you said, he kind of pointed out, I've never played in cold weather like this consistently. Things are heating up in Brooklyn, and so is his bat.
Look, I said it to his face. Literally, we were on camera. I said it right to his face. What scouts said, going back to draft, Kevin Parada's going to hit. Kevin Parada's going to hit for power. Like, that's what he's going to do, and he's starting to show that now. And he made the little changes in his mechanical tweaks, something we talked about with kind of his setup, and I think that's helped him be a lot more consistent. So all signs pointing up for Kevin Parada, and whenever I update my top prospect list, he is going to be squarely on the top of it.
All right, this week in Coney Island, the Brooklyn Cyclones host the Jersey Shore Blue Claws, an affiliate of the Phillies. There's a Thursday night meal deal that includes a ticket, a hot dog, chicken tenders or burger, chips, and a soft drink for $20. A Friday night drink special includes a ticket and 2 24-ounce beers or seltzer for just $20. Plus, enjoy post-game fireworks, or sometimes the fireworks just in the middle of home runs of the game. You never really know what you're going to get out there. On Saturday, the first 1,500 fans will receive a Brandon Nimmo bobblehead. Sunday is Dinos at the Diamond Night. The first 500 kids 14 under will receive a dinosaur squishy and free Dippin' Dots. Post-game, kids run the bases. For tickets and full details, visit brooklyncyclones.com. The promos at Brooklyn, these get longer every week.
What a read.
I mean,
what a read, though. A pro. An absolute pro.
It's good to be back.
Yeah,
it is really good to be back. I know you missed me just an
oh,
ounce
God, yes.
there. All right, let's close out here with some mailbag questions. This one from DeMarco. As the inevitable is upon us, I see David Robertson as the best trade chip. Would you agree? What can they expect back for a guy like that? And hopefully sign him again this offseason. I like that last part because we saw the Yankees actually do that with Chapman a couple years ago.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah.
Didn't they get Gleyber Torres?
They got Gleyber Torres and more. So they got like 4 pieces, including Gleyber Torres, and then they re-signed them. So, yeah, if David Robertson wants to keep playing baseball beyond this year and he's interested in coming back, I don't have an opposition to, bringing him back. But come trade deadline time, I think you just look kind of to what he net last year.
Right.
He's pitching better than he did last year, actually. So if you're willing to eat the money,
he's fresh. There's not a lot of tread on the tires this year.
Poor guy's not pitching much, but if you're willing to pay the money down too, which is just what we were talking about, that's going to increase, and you might even get a better pitching prospect than what the Cubs got last year. They got a pitcher, Ben Brown, who at the time was like a top 10-ish prospect in the system, and now he's a top 100. He's, I think, number 77 on MLB Pipeline's latest update. So let's just think about the contenders. Who are the contenders? Because every contender wants to add a reliever. And I was thinking about this last night while I was watching the Mets lose. I was like, all right,
that's how it goes.
Let's think about what can we look at for David Robertson. And one team I identified, and maybe they wouldn't even be like a prime candidate because they have 2 really good relievers, but why not have 3 really good relievers? The San Francisco Giants are an interesting team to me because they have a good amount of pitching prospects. They were very aggressive in last year's draft. And a pitcher that kind of reminds me, not literally as far as their stuff, but kind of where he's ranked at the moment and where he could be headed. A guy like Carson Wissenhunt, who was a second-round pick last year, maybe if you pay down the money, you could get someone like that for David Robertson. And to me, that would be great for the Mets. And, if you're at the time when you're selling, the focus clearly, I think, is on getting pitching prospects. My hope is that the priority isn't that it has to be near big league ready. I want the best prospects that you can get, because if you think back to when the Mets traded Carlos Beltran to the Giants, they could have traded him for Gary Brown and Heath Hembree. Heath Hembree actually pitched for the Mets like a year or 2 ago. But Gary Brown is now an area scout who signed last year's first-round pick Jet Williams. Right. And instead, they're like, we'll take the lower minors guy and take Zach Wheeler. So
pretty decent.
So don't be afraid to take someone in the lower minors. It doesn't have to be upper-level pitching.
No, I think it's a really good point, and it brings up a matter of the Giants are a really good call-out because they're a team that we saw them try to floor it in the offseason. They wanted Aaron Judge. Yeah. They wanted Carlos Correa. They were ready to spend big, and they still signed Michael Conforto. They got Mitch Haniger. I mean, they made moves, and they're having a really good season. So we know that they pick their spots when to be aggressive. Maybe this trade deadline will be
And we might as well just give them more Mets. They don't have enough.
That's right. Just J.D. Davis out there, on and it goes. All right, this next one from Frank. Time to look ahead to next year. It'd be cool if you could spend time. It's not time to look ahead to next year. Not yet. But this is a good question from Frank. I want to point that out. It'd be cool if you could spend time covering how much payroll the Mets have to shed to not be penalized in the draft next year, because we're on our way to a bottom 10 record of the season. Not really a question, I know, but it would be good to cover.
Okay, so the new rules in the new collective bargaining agreement when it comes to draft pick and luxury tax spending, if a team exceeds the luxury tax by $40 million or more, their first pick is dropped 10 spots, and that happened to
Mets
the Mets
this year.
Mets this year. So in next month's draft, the Mets would have had the 22nd pick. Instead, they have the 32nd pick. However, that's protected if you pick within the top 6 selections, and then at that point, your second
Which
pick,
is wild, by the way.
Which is wild. Like it's wild to think.
You spent so much money, and you were still one of the 6th worst teams in baseball.
Yeah, it doesn't check out. But
I don't think the Mets are going to finish that poorly.
But that's where the rule is. As far as how much money would they need to shed, like talking like at the deadline to be under, like north of $100 million. So not happening, especially with Steve Cohen being willing to eat the money. He already ate the Eduardo Escobar money, so that doesn't come off your luxury.
They show their hand. They're not going for that.
Yeah, and that's fine. Look, if the pick drops 10 spots, it drops 10 spots. I will take an ownership group that's willing to commit the dollars and the effort to try to win. And sometimes it doesn't work out. This year it's just unfortunately not working out at a very extreme level.
All right, I think that wraps up our show here at the Cadillac. Couple more? All right, we got time.
Yeah, a couple more.
They're not pushing us out here yet.
I love it.
All right, let's get right into more mailbag questions. We do have a lot here. I would love somebody to come up and just complain.
Yeah.
Because we don't get to do that from our homes all the time. It's just me and you going back and forth. Sometimes Jeff, our producer, is in our ear complaining about something, which is really nice to have. Joe, this question just for you.
Okay.
This user is called Fan of the Earth and Baseball.
Two good things.
Yeah, 2 great things. I miss Edwin Diaz. Not
Same.
just because we all do, not just because of his elite pitching, but the energy he brought to the team and fans. Do you think, let's get away from Diaz being the best reliever in baseball last year, the fact that, listen, we'd love a 8th and 9th inning of Robertson to Diaz, or even Robertson could throw 2 innings sometimes, however you want to call it. But the energy aspect, do you think there's something to that with Diaz? I mean, his entrance was maybe the most viral moment of the regular season of baseball last year.
For sure, and that's the entrance part of it. I think is more exciting for the fans and SNY putting together all the cool montages and everything. But I think the energy that he brought to the team was when the game got to the 9th inning, it was over. When the game got to the 8th inning and he had to come in for 5 outs, the game was over. So I think the players on the team had more comfort when they knew Edwin. Not that David Robertson's done a bad job; he's done a great job. But we're just not getting the ball to him. And Edwin Diaz was just kind of a safety blanket of sorts. That was just like, we know when Edwin Diaz comes in the game, this ball game's over. And if you want to dance the narco while he's coming out, go for it.
Yeah, the ballpark was jumping with Edwin Diaz. We can't wait to see him back, what we presume is next season. Yeah. So this one from Aurelio Morales always sends us great stuff. We glossed over this, so this is a little bit more of a deep dive. What would you grade the Escobar trade? And Joe, this part's definitely for you. What can you tell us about the prospects that came back in the trade?
Yeah, we kind of glossed over it. To me, that's easy, like B+, A- trade, and it's not necessarily that they got these big-time prospects. It's that they shed a guy that they weren't playing and got something useful for him, at least potentially useful in prospects that MLB Pipeline put the top one, Coleman Crow. They put him number 11 on the Mets list. Granted, there's some updating that'll happen throughout the year. He's probably going to be lower than that for me, but between that and Landon Marceau, they got 2 guys that I comfortably would say would be within the top 25 of the system for a guy that they weren't using. And Crow obviously has been on the IL since the end of April with all I could find is elbow inflammation.
Right.
So I don't know exactly what's happening. There needs to be like a PSL the Flushing version of the Angels because I'm not getting much help.
What would that be called?
Yeah, I don't know. But like I'm not getting much help finding prospect information from there. But Coleman Crow's a guy that's, if he's healthy, is interesting. His fastball's up to 95. He's not a hard thrower. He sits more 91 to 93 and relies on sink. He's got a plus breaking ball. He profiles as like a fit starter, swing guy. You're talking about a Trevor Williams. Maybe that's the type of prospect player he could become as a prospect. And Landon Marceau is a guy that, to me, I would move him to the bullpen now. I think he's a reliever long term that relies on pitchability, command, more so than stuff, which is unique because so often now so many guys throw hard, and the Mets pursue so many hard throwers, but they pursue 2 guys that are actually not hard throwers.
And this goes back to our conversation. A lot of organizations that have spent years building up that pitching depth, those guys might be prospect number 19 or 23, but when you go through all the injuries, instead of throwing out, I'm not going to do specific names anymore, but guys that have bounced around the league for 10 years and have proven they are not effective major leaguers, that's why they're often in AAA, instead of going to those guys, like unfortunately the Mets have done the entire season, right? Outside of really Robertson, Ottavino, who's had a down year. That's who they've been throwing out there on the mound. You go to guys like this that were legitimate prospects, have some upside, and if their floor is the same thing, a reliever that bounces around from AAA to the majors, they're under team control as well. These are the kinds of guys you want, the high-end stuff, but you do need volume, and this is a volume trade, and it's a good one. Yeah,
it's a good volume trade, and frankly, if this Mets pitching development system is growing the way it is, maybe you could find a way to add a tick or two. That's what the Dodgers do all the time. They pick up guys, and they're magically throwing 95, and they weren't throwing 95 before.
Pitching lab.
Yeah, so they figure it out. So hopefully the Mets are trending in a direction where they can just, if you just get a tick or two more out of some of these guys, it makes a drastic difference in what their long-term profile looks like.
All right, this is a good one to close out on because it's a little bit more of a positive outline.
Yeah, we need positive.
It's a positive outline. First pitch hasn't been thrown as we're sitting here recording this. We need some positivity. This is from C's, who said, do the Mets have a Philly type of run in them from last year? Besides starters' inability to go deep in games, what is the Mets' number one issue right now? So after you answer the number one issue, Joe, I think we map out really what has to happen with this team to get, I don't want to say back on track where they're magically won 10 games in a row and everything's fine, they make a move at the deadline, but to make the second half matter, I think is how you frame it.
I think it needs to start with winning tonight's game here on Tuesday while we're here at Citi Field, and they need to rally off before the break and go into the All-Star break with positive momentum, so that way when they're coming out of it, they feel good, rather than falling into the All-Star break, going 500 the rest of the way, or even worse. It needs to start right now. There's no more room for error. There's no more room for thinking big picture for the whole season. They need to start winning baseball games right now.
Oh, it's July, man.
Yeah. I mean, it's about to be July. So, they often say Memorial Day is a barometer. We kind of pushed past that, and now it's the All-Star break's the barometer. You can't keep pushing the goalposts further and
September,
further away.
That's not a good barometer.
No. So, do I think they have that type of run in them? Look, this team has a lot of talent. It's just not performing to expectations. Steve Cohen and the ownership group spent an all-time record on this payroll. They have 2 Hall of Famers at the top of the rotation. They have a Japanese pitcher in Kodai Senga who's been everything they could have asked for. Francisco Lindor, while not the average on base isn't what you'd like to see, he's been incredibly productive in run production. It's just been so inconsistent across the board, and it's hard to envision that type of run, but I appreciate the optimism, and if they can start winning games right now, they can at least leave open the door that this is not, a lost year yet.
I think for me, one obvious and one not so obvious. The obvious that we can only talk about so much is the starting pitching has to perform.
Yeah.
There's nothing Buck Showalter can do. Honestly, in my eyes, there's nothing Jeremy Hefner can do.
No.
What is Jeremy Hefner going to go tell Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer right now? And it's not just them. Like you said, it's the back-end guys like Carrasco. Can Quintana come back and be a number 4? Not asking him to fill a void as a 1, 2, or 3. Be a number 4. The not so obvious to me that I've realized from watching this team every day last year to every day this year also, they don't seem to work at bats the same way they did. Remember how frustrating they were? Every game started off with a 10-pitch Brandon Nimmo at bat. Even if he struck out, grounded out, walked, hit a single, a home run, it always felt like he got the pitcher off to a frustrating start. And it felt like that kind of had a trickle effect throughout the rest of the lineup that even if we get out, you look at the 4th inning and you'd have a starting pitcher, good starting pitchers, at 80 pitches, 85 pitches, and you go, okay, now we tap into what teams do to the Mets.
Yeah, you're tapping into the bullpen, the lower end of a bullpen, which there is no team that doesn't have a suspect low end of the pen. And, it's just one of those things that last night, Monday's game, because I know about timing. Monday's game, I think I saw the stat, the last 11 batters of the Mets saw 34 pitches.
I mean,
That's 3 pitches per at-bat. That's insane.
And it's not a different lineup. That's what's crazy to me. Jeff McNeil, obviously, Lindor and Pete have hit the home runs, but the at-bat consistency is not there. Nimmo, there was a question in there about his K rate this year. He has been striking out more than we're accustomed to seeing. It's just, that's a big one to me, Joe, that until that improves, that's a slower burn, but it's a problem this year. It really is. So they need to get back to being a tough out consistently through the lineup, and the starting pitching needs to get better. And like you said, it's got to happen real soon. A huge thanks to Cadillac for having us. What's your favorite part so far? This is your second visit to the Cadillac Club. What's the best part of the Cadillac Club for those that haven't been?
Oh, man. I mean, the food, the drink,
that's the food.
The setup. It's an interesting view that, when you think of sitting field level at a game, you're not really field level. Like, you look over there above the dugout, like, they're 10, 15 feet above the field. This is genuinely on the field. So it's a unique view, and, yeah, it's a great place. And whether they were our sponsor or not, I'd be saying this. It's
100%.
Yeah.
This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And, of course, a reminder to subscribe to the show, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch us hang out here at home at the Cadillac Club on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. We'll catch you next week.